So this video is for my new students and the new subscribers to my channel. This is a quick overview of motion design, and once you see this overview, then you can go through the other tutorials on my site. It's just this will help you get an understanding of motion design. So when you're in After Effects, you'll start a new project, which we've already got open, and then it's new composition. In my class, we do everything 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames per second. And here in duration, to read time code, it goes hours, minutes, seconds, frames. So this is 10 seconds. If I just put a 10 here, that's only 10 frames. So that's not really going to help anybody there. So that's just an overview of time code. Your size will change based upon what you want. If you're doing something professionally, the client will normally give you a size pixel-wise and frame rate. 24 is good for, general thumb, film, and internet. 2997 or 30 might be for TV, based upon what country you're in. But like I said, all that is region-based, and you will get guidelines as to how to move forward. But for now, we're just doing 1920 by 1080, 24 frames at 10 seconds. Okay, so you've got your project all set up. The project panel is where you assemble all your clips. The composition is where you'll preview your animation. Think of it as like the TV screen or the movie screen you're watching it on. All of your effects can be accessed over on the right hand side. And down here is your timeline. The composition is the sequence we're working in. Alright. Now, motion design is graphic design, but adding time and space. And there's a very basic workflow, and I'm going to walk you through it. And this is the same no matter what you're doing. Visual effects, motion design, whatever you want to do. It starts with this workflow. So first thing you want to do is think about what you want to do. Motion design is 85% mental, and then the other 15% is trying to figure it out. The four pillars of motion design are position, scale, rotation, and transparency. And if you can't remember that, whenever you have a layer in your timeline, and you can have as many layers as you like, and whatever's on top is what you'll see above the other things below. But if you can't remember your four pillars, position, scale, rotation, and transparency, you just click on the twirl down arrow that is in every layer. Right there. And then transform, and there you'll see your four pillars: position, scale, rotation, and opacity. And from those, you can do a lot of creative things. It might not seem like it at first, but when you play around with them, you'll start to see the possibilities and get more comfortable with your animating. Okay, so first, you think about what you want to do. So for this, I'm going to have this square grow from the center out all sides. All right. So if I want to grow out of the center, I'm going to need to move my anchor point. This is the selection arrow that I've selected. This is for moving whole layers and items. To move an anchor point, you use the pan behind tool, which is right next to the film camera. And when you click and drag on your anchor point, holding down Command or Control will snap it to an edge or a corner or the center. And I'm going to put it in the center because that's where I want my motion to come out of. So you think about what you want to do. Then you move your anchor point because the anchor point will influence the animation. Then you click on the playhead, which is right here in the timeline, and you can click and drag and move it to wherever you want your animation to begin. So if I want to begin right here, that's where I have it. So I've got my thought. It's going to scale out of the center. I've said where I want it to start. And if I know I want this to scale out to grow, I click on the scale stopwatch over here at the side. I've clicked on it, and that will automatically create a keyframe here in my timeline where my playhead was. So the next step, I just make a change over time. All motion design, all keyframe animation needs a minimum of 2 keyframes to do anything. And they could be 1 frame apart, or they could be as many frames apart as you want. And then you make a change. And that's it in a nutshell. You think about what you want, move your anchor based upon how you want the motion to move. Click the right, well then you move the playhead. Click the stopwatch you want to animate. Move forward or backward in time and make a change. And that'll automatically make your keyframe. You can go forward in time or you can go back in time. I could put keyframe right here before the first one and have it be even smaller. Okay? That is the bare basics. So I'm going to delete this layer and we'll show you what I mean. Sorry about that. I'll show you what I mean with a star shape. So here's my star. And you go saying, well, what do you mean that the anchor point will influence the animation? Well, here's a classic example because this is points, so you'll be able to see what I'm doing. So I've got my layer selected, and when it's white like this, that means it's selected. Now it's deselected, and I've selected it again. All right, so I'm just showing you what selected means. There's my anchor point. If I want this to spin around like a propeller blade, I need to have the anchor point at the middle because that's where it's going to move out from. So I snap it to the center, and rotation is that spinning. So you can see it starts to spin around like a propeller blade if that's what I wanted. But if I want to swing side by side like a pendulum, I'd want the anchor point up near the top. So I'm going to hold down Command or Control to snap it there. And now I'm going to do my animation. And you can see how I've got a completely different movement because of how I moved my anchor point. Okay? So when you're dealing with rotation, right here, the first number is complete rotations. So if I type a 1, it's one full rotation. Or you could go by a number of degrees on the second one. You can make your changes across time in 3 different ways. I'm going to delete that and put down another square. So I'm going to move this from one side of the screen to the next, which means I set my anchor point first. I'm just going to put it in the center by holding down Command or Control. Go back to my selection arrow. If I wanted to move, that's position. So I twirl down the arrow, and I move my playhead to where I want to start animating. I'll say right here. I click the stopwatch for position. Now I've got 3 options. So the first thing I do is I move my playhead. And I think about where I want this to move. And there's 3 ways I can move it. With my item select tool, I can then just click and drag. Oops, sorry about that. That's changing the position. I can click and drag. If I hold down Shift, it'll be a straight line. So that was moving it by clicking and dragging. I'll hit Commands, and you see it created a second anchor point. Second keyframe there. That's the first way. The second way, I can just hover over and scrub across those blue numbers right down here in the timeline. That's the second way, and as you see, it created another keyframe. Or the third way, I can type in a number and then hit Enter. And that is it. So you could do it by typing in a number, or by moving it physically, or just scrubbing because you don't know where you want it to end up. But you could do it by eye, or you could do it mathematically. So I'm going to make an ellipse, hold down Shift. Holding down Shift will give me a circle. If I don't, I'll get an ellipse. Alright, so my anchor point is a little off center. I'm going to use my pan behind tool. Hold down Command or Control. And sometimes if you can't move your anchor point, you got to deselect the layer, then select it again. I'm going to go back to my selection arrow. Okay, for this, I'm going to have it scale from 0 to 100 down to 0 over time. So I'm going to move my playhead, and I know I want to do scale, so I want it to grow. So I click on the stopwatch, my anchor point's set, my playhead's there, I figure out how long I want it to be, let's say here, and I can click on this empty diamond over here to get another keyframe as well. And this is very useful when you don't want things to change in between time. Like you want to keep your animation up for a certain amount of time. That diamond is great because it won't create a change. Like I can click it again. I've got 3 keyframes that are all the same value. And you're not going to see any change because they're all 100%. And Now I can go and select any keyframe I want by hitting the next keyframe button or the previous keyframe button, and then change it how I want. And I can do it manually because I know exactly what I want to do. I'm going to go from 0 to 100, back to 0. So I want to make sure I'm over that keyframe, because if I'm not, I'll create an unwanted keyframe. Like say I have my playhead here and I make a change, that created another keyframe. I can select it and hit the backspace, or I can click on the diamond to get rid of it. If you click on the stopwatch after making your keyframes, they'll all disappear. Just hit undo if you did that by accident. So there's my animation, and it's very simple. These diamond keyframes are called linear, and what that means is there's no speed up or slow down in or out of these keyframes. It's like the second hand on a clock. It's very steady, or a gear in a machine moving. To change that, you can select one or all of your keyframes. You can mark key drag around them, or you can click on the word for that property that you want to change. You know, your properties are position, scale, rotation, transparency. So I've got them all selected. I can right click, choose Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. And what this is going to do, this is my speed graph right here next to the timeline. By default, it might open up to the value graph. It's also based upon who was working in the lab before you or after you. So the value is what is changing, how much scale is changing. It's going from 0 scale to 100 scale to 0 scale. And easy easing it gave me this bell curve. If I want to change the velocity in and out of my keyframes, you use the speed graph for that. And I'm just clicking on this button right next to the eyeball icon to get there. There's my speed graph. If I want to enhance my graph to get more of a fit to view, it's 2 buttons away from your magnifying glass. And these will allow you to select a keyframe and change it, like easy ease, ease out, ease in. But I already did that before coming in here. So if I select that, this is my keyframe. I don't want to move it up or down. That will change the value. And the value again is how much of a change. But if I click on this yellow ball to the side of it and I drag and I hold down shift, now I'm starting to change the velocity. This was slowing into that keyframe. If I move it closer to it, it's going to speed into that keyframe. So I'm changing the velocity in and out of these keyframes. Same as if I select this keyframe over here, grab my influence handle, drag, and then hold down shift, I'm speeding out of it faster. So it's going to go very quickly out of this keyframe, hit the full speed here, and then gradually slow down to here where it scales up. And then I can have it speed out of this one very quickly and slow into the next one. So it's going to go very quick, slow down over time, go very quick, and slow down over time. This slider will zoom you in or out of your speed graph as well as the timeline. So when I move my playhead back to the beginning and I hit the spacebar to preview it, you're going to see it have a completely different feel to the animation because I changed the velocity in and out of those keyframes. And if you want to fine tune this some more, this little blue bar right here on your timeline, this is where you change your render area. So you don't have to wait for the whole animation to preview. You can just focus on a little area and fine tune it how you want. When you move keyframes closer together, the speed will be quicker. And this will not change the velocity I just changed. The velocity stays the same. It's just the time of the overall animation will get faster. So it's still going to keep that velocity, but then speed up. And if I want to keep that velocity I just changed, but have this last part a little longer, I just drag it further away and change my render area. So it's a combination of adjusting your speed graph as well as moving your keyframes around to get your object moving the way you want. So that's the brief overview. I'm going to click the word stroke, then none, hit OK. Click the word fill, choose solid. Now I've got a solid for this next example. So I'm keeping my initial design and I'm selecting the layer. When you hit the U key, that'll show just the keyframes that you put. Another basic tip with motion design is if you hit Command D, you'll duplicate the layer. I can move my playhead a little bit. I'll hit the U key to show my keyframes, and I'll hold down the Shift key while I drag, and that will snap this to the playhead. And I'm going to change the color of that layer. And when you duplicate, Command D or Control D, you copy everything on that layer, the effects, the keyframing, the speed graph information. So it's a very useful way to get more polished and interesting designs. Do it once the way you want it, then you duplicate the layer and offset it. That's what this is called, offsetting your animation, by sliding it down the timeline. And I'll change the color of that. So now I've got something more interesting just based off of that one shape that I done. Think about what you want to do. Move the anchor point, because the anchor point will influence the animation. It's going to say which direction or how it's moving. Then move your playhead to where you want your animation to start. Then click the stopwatch you want to animate. Then just move your playhead to where you want the next change to be, make a change, and After Effects will automatically make that next keyframe. And it fills in the information in between them. That's called keyframe animation. And the computer is doing most of the work for you. You just got to figure out how you want to get there. So I'm going to delete these because I gave you a quick overview of those. So you had an idea of shapes, and I'm going to go back to my shape layer right here. You can click the word fill to get rid of a fill, or to add a solid or a gradient. And for stroke, you do the same thing. If you don't want the stroke, just click the word stroke and add a fill, or get rid of it as you want. So for this, I'm going to want no fill and a stroke that's a solid, and about there, so we'll be able to see it. I'm going to use my pen tool. When you click and drag, you get Bezier curve handles. And if you just click, you're going to get straight lines. So it's really just like Illustrator or Photoshop. You work how you want to. And we know that you can click and animate anything that has a stopwatch in After Effects. And whenever you want to see more information from a menu, you just twirl down the menu and you'll keep getting more information. Now I'm looking at this path right here, so let's see what the path has to offer us. There's a stopwatch next to the path, and what that means is if I click that stopwatch and I move my playhead, and I've got my selection arrow, I can hold down Shift and click on one of the path points. And now I can move that path point. In addition to moving path points to animate them, you can also animate the Bezier curve handles to change how something is going to move through time and space. And when you do that, After Effects will fill in that information. So now you see some more animation possibilities. You can move the path points, as I'd said, and you can also animate the Bezier curve handles. And as I said before, it's just like Illustrator and Photoshop, working with the pen tool there. The only difference is we're adding time and space, and After Effects fills in the information in between for these. I'm going to select those and ease them to get a more professional motion. And if I wanted to, I could go into my speed graph and change how that's going to come in and out of the various keyframes that I just made. And I click the speed graph to get out of it. I'm going to zoom back out of my timeline and move this here. I'm going to make my stroke a little thicker just so we can see what's going on more easily for this next part. And I hit the space bar to preview my animation, and you see it moving. Now let's take some more looks into paths in After Effects. I twirl down the stroke. If I wanted to, I can add a dash by clicking the plus next to dashes right there. And I can have more or less dashes. Don't forget, whenever you see a stopwatch in After Effects, that means you can animate something, like offset. I'll show you what that does. I click that stopwatch, I go forward, and I make a change. And what that's going to do is it's going to animate the dashes while the path is moving. You're starting to see the possibilities. I'm just breaking it down to the simplest way possible. Move the anchor point, because that's going to influence your animation. Then move the playhead to where you want to start your animating. Then click on the stopwatch you want to animate. Then move your playhead forward or back in time. You have to go at least 1 frame, and then make a change, and the computer fills it in. That is the basics of motion design. I'm going to stay here for this next example. I've got my path, and we already have things animated, but this time I want to draw it on. And a very often used technique is trim paths. So I'll show you how to get to that in a second. So first you select your layer with the item select arrow, and you can get to the add down here in the layer or up here. There's 2 different spots to get to it, but first you got to have your layer selected, and then you'll see it with the contents. So I want to add a trim paths. The way trim paths work is it's for drawing something on. I want it to go from the left side to the right side. Start is the first point I clicked on, and end is the second point I clicked on. So if I change my end, you see this starting to move in the direction I want it to. So I'm going to put my playhead here, start it at 0, move forward in time, and change it to 100. So all you need to do to draw it on is to animate 1 stopwatch, either end or start, depending upon the direction you want that motion to go. So now you see the path drawing on while the dash is animating, and the path points and Bezier curve handles are animating. It keeps all that information. You just keep building on and onto it as a designer. That's an example of keyframe animating with the add. I can also go into add again. I can put on wiggle paths, and you see that's going to add some randomness to my design. I can change the size of the wiggle. I can change the detail of the wiggle. I can even animate that because there are path points. There's stopwatches. I can change the number of wiggles per second, make them more or less. So I can fine-tune this and not even have to do any keyframe animating. Random seed will randomly change the amount of what's happening. So now you see them wiggling around the path. So I like that idea. So I'm going to click on spatial phase, move forward in time, and change this number. So now when my animation comes on, it's going to draw on. They're going to squirm around the path, as well as the path points and the Bezier curve handles change. Again, it's all about experimenting and playing around. And when I'm trying to figure out something, I make a huge change. See what it does, then I dial it down and get more subtle with it till I get the look that I want. Okay? So, animating 1 stopwatch under trim path will draw it on. You can have it draw itself off as well and choose when you want that to happen. You just click on the opposite stopwatch. If I drew it on with end, I have to draw it off with start. So I click where I want that to happen, move forward to where I want it to end. I'm going to increase my render area, and I change it to the amount that I want it to draw off. In that case, it's a complete draw off. So this is now my animation. Okay? And don't forget, I'm going to hit the U key. The U key will show all your keyframes, and you can see I've activated a lot more animating going on here. If I like this, and this is what I want, I can hit Command D to duplicate the whole layer, and move my playhead, and slide this duplicate down in the timeline, and just change the color to add a little bit more interest to my animation. And I can do that as many times as I want, and I'm going to duplicate it one more time, hit the U key to see my keyframes, and I'm going to change this color to green, and I'm going to offset it in the timeline. Hit the U key just to free up some space. Now, suppose I want the green to stay on. So I hit U to get back to my keyframes. And I'm going to move my playhead to before start. That's what's drawing it off. I'm going to click off that stopwatch. So now, when this follows through the animation, the first 2 will draw off. but the last one will stay on. It's all about thinking about what you want to do and figuring out how you want to get there. Set your anchor point, move the playhead, click the stopwatch you want, then move forward or backward in time, however far or short you want it to be, and make a change. That is motion design in a nutshell. So I'm going to select these layers and delete them. And the next example I'm going to show will be setting up an expression. Because you've got an idea for your timeline and how you can click on anything you want. So I'm going to move my anchor point. I'm going to want this, I'm just going to do position. So I'm just going to put it over here on the edge. So I'm going to hold down Command and put that there. Actually, no, we're going to do something different. I'm going to show you an animation principle of squash and stretch. So I've got a circle. I'm going to make it a fill just so we can see this a little bit easier. So remember, you got to click the word fill to add a fill, and then you only click on these swatches to change the color. Okay, so there's my color. Now, I said I want to show you squash and stretch. So I'm going to make this drop down like a water balloon hitting the ground. And so I'm going to make this line here. I hit Command R to get my ruler, and I just clicked from within the ruler to create an imaginary ground. And to hide that guide, I'm just going to hit Command and the apostrophe or Control the apostrophe to hide it. I mean, comma. No, it's the colon. That's what it is. So if I want this to drop down, that is, oh, I need to see my ground again. So that was Command and the colon. So I'm going to animate it from off the edge of the screen down onto where this line is. You can use your mouse wheel to zoom in or out as well. So the gravity is what's going to cause the squash and stretch. So I'm going to want my anchor point at the bottom because that's what's going to be pulling it towards the ground. So I use my pan behind tool right here, click on the anchor point, hold down Command or Control to snap it to an edge or a center point. Now, I know the first thing is going to be, it's going to drop from the top. So I move my playhead to where I want my motion to start, and I'm going to hit P for position. You can get to these, like I said, by twirling down. They're all here in your transform, or you could hit P for position, S for scale, R for rotate, T for transparency. I want position, so I hit P. I set my anchor point. I want this to start here. I can use the sliders by hovering over and dragging, if I choose to. And I'm going to click my stopwatch, and I want this to fall over, let's say, 2 seconds. I can either click and drag like that. That's one way of moving it. I could hover here, or I could click once and type in a number, like so. That's 3 ways of making this move over time. So there is my initial motion, okay? I'm going to ease this. So I selected both, or I could click the word, hover over, right click, change my keyframe interpolation to easy ease. And again, this will give me this nice little speed ramp. It's slowing out of the first one. Here's the maximum speed that's slowing into the second one. We know things fall faster than they rise. So I'm going to have this speed into the final one like that. I'm going to speed this up a little bit by, if I move my keyframe to the side like that, it's going to make it, it's going to move it in the timeline as well. And you can see I moved it half a second faster. So there's my initial motion, okay? If I want to fall faster, I just slide it there in the timeline. It's going to keep my acceleration. Now for squash and stretch, I'm going to say my squash and stretch start here, so that's scale. If I want to keep up my position keyframes, I can just hold down the shift key, then hit S, and that will just add scale. So I had something in my timeline already, and I just held down shift and hit what I wanted, which was S for scale. I'll click here, and then my maximum squash and stretch is going to be right before impact. So I'm going to add a keyframe right there. Now, for squash and stretch, that's non-uniform scaling. So I click off the link here. If I have the link on, it's going to scale uniformly out of where the anchor point is. But if I do non-uniform, I can do squash and stretch. Squash and stretch, you want to keep your volume consistent. So you squash upwards, and when you go up, the other sides go in. That's for stretch. For squash, you go down and out. So to do this uniformly, I'll do, let's say 180. So if I went up 80, I've got to go in 80. So if this was 100, it's now going to be 20. You can see why I like to work with numbers, because I'm keeping my volume consistent. I went up 80 and in 80. So I go forward 1 frame. Oh, 2 frames. Okay. So you can do that by hitting page up or page down on your keyboard, or changing your number here. Remember, these are frames, these are seconds, minutes, hours. So at impact, that's when it's going to squash. So I stretched. So if I went up 80 and in 80 for my stretch, my squash, I'll go out 80 and in 80. So if I go to my previous keyframe, you'll see it's 20 and 180. That's the stretch. Keeping the volume, it's 180 and 20. And then I can just go forward a few frames and set it back to 100, 100. So what that's going to look like is that I can even move this forward a little bit. And then I'm going to ease these keyframes by selecting them. Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease, and then change my render area. Hit the spacebar to preview it. That's an example of squash and stretch. One of the principles of animation, the basic principles. I'm going to delete that layer. Now I'm going to show you a quick example of an expression. Remember, with all your keyframing, you need to have at least 2 keyframes, and they have to be a minimum of 1 keyframe apart, either forward or backward in time. So here I am. I'm going to put this over here in the middle by holding down Command or Control to snap it, and I'm going to do position. So I just hit P. Now, I'm just going to throw the most basic expression on this, and to put an expression on any stopwatch. Now remember, stopwatch, you click it, that means you can animate it over time. Stopwatches also mean you can add expressions. So I'm going to Alt or Option click in there, and I'm going to type in wiggle and then parenthesis, and I'll type in a number. So I'll do 3, 900 and parenthesis. In the newer version, this auto populates in here. I was just didn't have time to update it. So 3 is the number of times per second, and 900 is the amount. And what this is doing is it's moving this randomly for me. Make sure you click out of your expression. I'm in the expression, you click out, because any spaces you add will alter your expression. It has to be typed in perfectly, and it has to have all the right line breaks when you do more complex codes. So this is just an expression, and it's auto animating it. So I'm going to delete that expression. And I'm going to click position. I'm going to move forward in time, and I'm going to move straight across. And let's go to my first keyframe, select just that keyframe, and move it over to the edge. So I've got a straight motion. Now, I can keep these keyframes, Alt or Option click on the stopwatch, and type in that expression again. Wiggle, parenthesis. This time, let's do 2, 70. So it's not moving as much, but it's moving a little bit more. And you'll see it's going straight side to side, but it's adding a slight up and down to it as a random element. So I'm keeping the same spirit of what this expression did, but I'm giving it a purpose. I'm moving it from one side to the next. I'm just showing you some possibilities that doing one expression will do one thing, but then if you add keyframes to it, you can get a much more interesting result. So it's all about experimenting, and it's all about playing around with things. And lastly, I'm going to give you a quick introduction. I'm going to hit Command colon to get rid of that. I'm going to give you a quick introduction to some effects. And a quick tip, do not use caps lock in After Effects. It won't preview your animation. It locks up the RAM and you won't see anything. So if nothing's happening, see if caps lock is on and turn it off. Don't hit Command 0 or Control 0. It will not fit to view. It'll hide some Windows panels. I'll show you. If I hit Command 0, stuff disappears over here on the side. You hit Command 0 to bring it back. Okay, so I'm going to draw just a shape. There we go, I've got my shape. All right. Now, we're going to talk about effects. When you want to apply an effect to a layer, your effects should be over here on the side. And I'm going to type in TURB, Turbulent Displace. It's a very common used effect. I'm going to drag it onto my shape. And already you see it distorted my image a little bit, the shape. Remember, anything with the stopwatch can be animated. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you this. There's a crosshair right across from offset turbulence, right there. I'm going to show you what crosshairs do so that you can understand effects better. Crosshairs, you click once and then click where you want it to be. Rather than figure out the X and Y coordinates, X is side to side, Y is up and down. So I can click there, and anything with the stopwatch, you can animate. So I got my playhead, I click the stopwatch, I move forward in time, and rather than figure out where I want this to end up, I'm going to use my crosshair, and I'm going to say I want it to be here, so it's almost a diagonal motion. Now you can see it moving diagonally, and it's automatically giving some animation to this still shape because of what this effect does. I could animate the amount, which is how much it's distorting it, and the size, which is the size of the distortion. The amount is how many times. So let's try and have the size ramp up about here. So I'm going to increase that number, and then I'm going to decrease it towards the end, like such. And we'll see what that does. See? There we go. I'll just scrub my playhead. That's an example of playing around with your effects. And as I said before, whenever you see this, 0x plus 0, 0, that's complete rotations and then a specific number of degrees. So if I want to do one full phase loop of this animation, I can click evolution, move forward here, and then say I want one full phase of this effect. So I just had to put a 1 there, and that's going to change the shape of the effect as well. And we've already changed the direction with the offset. That's 1. So I'm going to delete this effect. Well, actually, I'm going to show you how to hide an effect. There's FX here. I click there, and it's hidden. Now you see my original shape. There's no motion because I didn't keyframe the shape, just the effect. I'm going to type in bend right here, and I'm going to put CC Bender. I'm going to drag it onto this layer. So there's my first effect. It's hidden. Here's the new one. And look what we've got. We've got crosshairs. And I already told you, click once, top. I'm going to click on the one for base, bottom. So I found where the top and bottom are, and I clicked on those. So, not a whole lot of stopwatches here. I'm going to click them out. I'm going to go forward a little bit, and I'm going to give it a positive direction. I'm going to go forward a little bit more. I'm going to give it a negative direction. I'm going to go forward a little bit more. I'm going to set it back towards there. I'm going to hit U on my keyframe so you can see all my keyframes. I don't want to see turbulent display, so I'll just twirl that down. And now I've got this bending like a flag or a blade of grass. And I didn't have to animate the shape. I just found an effect I wanted. I just typed in bend because I wanted it to bend. And all I had to do was figure out where the top was and the bottom. And it's all about playing around. And you see how the shape changed when I changed the pull down to Marilyn, the drop down menu. See, now it's doing something completely different than the first one. I'll show you the first one was bend. See that? It's only bending off of the bottom. If I try sharp, now it's got corners to it. So that would be almost like someone bending their elbow at this point. Again, it's all about experimenting. You'll get different results just playing around. Just figure out where you want your anchor point, move your playhead, click on the stopwatch you want to animate, then move the playhead again, forward or backward in time. And you say, why do you keep saying forward or backward in time? And here's my final thing I'm going to go over. I'm just going to create 3 shapes. Now, this is important, and I haven't gotten to this yet. If I have this layer selected and I draw another shape, what's going to happen is it's going to draw this shape into this layer. I don't want that. I want another layer, so I got to make sure it's deselected. There's selected, there's deselected. You could hit Command-Shift-A to deselect all if you want. I'm going to draw my star. I'm going to change the color so you can see what's going to happen. I'm going to make it green. I'm going to deselect it because remember, if I have it selected, it's going to draw another shape into that layer. I want 3 layers. General rule of thumb with motion design is the more layers you have, the more flexibility you have as a designer. It just gives you more play. And you'll see why with this example. Let's pretend this is a client's logo. And like I said, I'm just working off of simple shapes to quickly show you these concepts. You learn the concepts, you can apply them creatively. I'm not showing you how to be creative, I'm just showing you how to use the concepts. So first, I'm going to set my anchor points. I'm going to put this in the center by holding down Command or Control. For the star, my anchor point's right here. I'm going to put this to the top, just for this. And then the square, I'm going to set mine to the left edge. I mean, the right edge, sorry about that, right there. Now, I say, set your anchor points. I just did. Set your keyframe, well, move your playhead, set your keyframe, and then move forward or back in time. But watch this. Pretend this is the client's logo, and they want to animate on for 3 seconds and stay on for 3 seconds. Okay, so this is where it's going to end, and that's where it's going to stay still for a few seconds. So I know this is the end point. I can select all 3 of these layers, put it back on my item select tool, and I can twirl down my transform. And the beauty of having multiple layers selected when you click stopwatches, like that I just clicked and drag, it's going to do it for all of them. But it didn't do it there, which is weird, but I'm just going to do it real fast here. There we go. Alright, so this is where it's going to end. These are the ending keyframes. Well, I told you can go forward in time or backward in time, so I'm going to go back in time to about here where I want my next motion to happen. Here's my circle. Let's have the circle coming from the bottom. So I'm going to move it downward off the screen. And we already know it's going to end up right where I wanted it to. Okay? So that is already useful. And then I've got my star. And I know it's where it's going to end up. And let's have it come in a little bit before the circle. This is called animation hierarchy, deciding what comes in, when, and how. And in addition to it sliding down, I'm going to animate the full rotations. So you'll see it spinning as it moves off of that anchor point, because I already know it's going to end with 0 rotation and the position where I want it, right then and there. So I've got more flexibility. Now, the square, sorry about that. I'm going to have that one come on pretty quick from about here, and let's do the scale, but we're going to do non-uniform. And I'm going to want this to be at 0, like that. So that's going to grow out from the side, and everything's going to line up. And I'm just going to hit the U key to see my keyframes. I knew it'd all end up where I wanted it to. This is useful for your clients if they've got logos and an established look. So you say, this is where I'm going to end. Then you can work backwards from the beginning, towards the beginning, and have things come in the order you want and how you want, and know that it'll stay up for the length that you want. And that's sort of the basics for beginning to think like a motion designer. And remember, linear keyframes are only good for mechanical motion. So I selected all of them, right-clicked, and chose Easy Ease. And that'll give me a little bit more of a slow in, slow out with some more interesting animation. We've shown you how to animate with the speed graph here. Now there's one more thing I want to show you. Right here you see my black selection arrow. I'm going to zoom in. There's my item select arrow. But watch what happens when I move it to the beginning of the layer. It changes. This means if I slide this around, it's going to move the whole layer. This arrow means if I move it, it's going to change when that layer starts, but keeping the keyframes in place. So it's a way of trimming a layer so it's not always in your timeline, and that could be pretty good. And there's one more trick I want to show you. Now the red square, we saw right here, its anchor point is on the right edge and it grows out that way. I'm going to solo this. So here's my solo right here. I click on the solo for that and there's that layer. And we see it grow out from the right edge. If I move my anchor point, that's going to affect the animation. We already covered that. That's why it's step one. But suppose my client says, now we want it to scale down to the bottom. So I know I'm going to want my anchor point at the bottom and scale down to it. The fast, easy way for that is a split duplicate. So I select the layer, and there's two ways to do it. I can hit Command-Shift-D or Control-Shift-D, and you saw how to split duplicate the layer. I'll hit undo. And if you can't remember that effect, it's Edit, Split Layer, and it's going to split it where the playhead is, which is right here. Now I'm going to move forward a couple frames just for the fun of it. Now, I know I want my anchor point to be at the bottom, so it scales to the bottom. So I grab my Pan Behind tool, hold down Command or Control. Now, when I hit S to scale this, I'm going to click my keyframe. It's already non-uniform. I'll move forward and then just scale down on the Y, which is this one over here. So I'll type that down to 0. So now I've got it growing out the right edge. It did not change that first animation. We split the layer and now it's going to scale down to the bottom like that. Let me delete this. There's a little bit of a hiccup there from this gap that we're seeing. But now you know how to move the anchor point just by splitting the layer and then giving it a different look. And then you unsolo and you'll see all your layers when you're ready for them. And that is the basic intro to motion design. Make sure you save your file frequently. And if you're moving a little slow, you can click here to change your resolution speed. And whenever you're done learning from day-to-day to After Effects, oh, that was soloed, okay. So whenever you're done with your day-to-day learning, always go Edit, Purge, All Memory, and Disk Cache. See, just that little tutorial ate up 8.6 gigs of space on my computer. And just remember, save frequently, save often, play around, have fun. Sometimes an effect will do it, sometimes it won't, but always think about how you want it to move. Set your anchor point because the anchor point influences the animation. Move the playhead to where you want to start animating, then click on the stopwatch. Move forward or backward in time and make a change. You could have as many keyframes as you like. You need a minimum of 2. And that's then just ease your keyframes and adjust them in the speed graph. That's motion design in a nutshell. Play around with it, exercise in it daily, and you'll get very good at it in a short amount of time. And I wish you all the best of luck.